Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 330. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. Today I'm joined by Dave DeCamp. He's the news editor at antiwar.com and hosts the antiwar.com news show that he puts out Monday through Friday. Absolutely excellent, great breakdown of foreign policy news. So check that out if you haven't already. If you're a fan of this show, you're definitely going to like Dave's show. On today's show, me and Dave are talking about Joe Biden's foreign policy, particularly what's going on with Russia and China. I think Dave has probably more than anyone really focused down and covered the China issue and the U.S. pivot to China, especially the escalation during the Trump and now Biden years. And then, of course, Dave has been doing a great job of covering the war in Ukraine day to day. So we'll talk about both of those situations and just where the Joe Biden White House is going to try to go from here. So be sure to share today's show. You can find it at the Libertarian Institute on the blog at antiwar.com, where, of course, me and Dave both work. You can find the show at YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee for the video version of the show, and do your CBD shopping with Paloma Verde, CBD.com. Promo code PEACE. That will save you 20% off when you spend $75 or more, and it gets the show kit bag. So it's a great way to help yourself and to help your favorite podcast. They have tinctures, soft gels, gummies, all kinds of topicals. Those are my favorites. They even have products for your dog. So check out everything they have at Paloma Verde, CBD.com. Promo code PEACE. And here's the interview with Dave DeCamp. Dave DeCamp, welcome back to the show. How you doing today?
Good, Kyle. Thanks for having me.
Very good to have you on. And I mean, you've been doing a ton of writing, covering a lot of really important stuff. I don't know how you're not getting super depressed here. In the last show I did, I had a couple members of my audience say, well, this one's a real bummer. But we're talking about the nuclear issue again here, Dave. One of the latest articles you have from antiwar.com says Russia says it's not threatening anyone with nukes, but that certainly didn't seem like the statements we are getting from the Kremlin last week. So what's going on here?
Yeah, so this was from Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister, Sergei Ryabkov, and he basically said that Russia's not threatening anyone, which is how he put it, and he said that they still are following their military doctrine on the use of nuclear weapons, which is Russia would use them if they face an existential threat, if the state of Russia's existence is threatened. And Russian officials have said throughout the war that still applies. And Ryabkov, he wasn't exactly downplaying what Putin said, because if you look at what Putin said exactly, he warned that he could use any weapons in Russia's disposal, to protect its territorial integrity. And you could argue that from Russia's point of view, if their territory is compromised in a significant way, that can be considered an existential threat. But it was still definitely significant. I'm not trying to downplay what Putin said that day, because it comes amid these referendums in the Donbass region and Kherson and Zaporizhia. All areas of Russian-controlled Ukraine are voting right now, as we're recording this, to join Russia, and it's pretty much a done deal. They're already talking. Russian lawmakers are talking about that this could happen this week and on Friday. As soon as that, it could become Russian territory. So the significant thing is that it looks like, and other Russian officials, Putin kind of alluded to this, that Dmitry Medvedev, who's former president on the deputy chair of the Security Council, he said explicitly that we will protect these new territories with nuclear weapons. The foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, he said that he didn't say explicitly nuclear weapons, but he said they would be under Russia's full protection. So now we're entering this phase where Ukraine's planning these huge counteroffensives, and they're going to be using U.S. and NATO weapons and intelligence. And what Russia's doing here is they're saying, okay, from now on, this war is going to be a war on Russia. So I think it's very significant what Putin said, but it's also, I think, important kind of to explain Russia's perspective, which is why I thought to highlight that, what Ryabkov said there, saying that it's still their nuclear doctrine. And just in general, I think it highlights how much more important this war is to Russia than it is to the U.S. I mean, losing this war could potentially be an existential threat to Putin, to the Russian government. So, this is just the level of things that we're dealing with, and the escalation. They're again just making it clear, and the Biden administration is showing no signs of backing down.
Yeah, so this is, I think, the last article I wrote for antiwar.com, and then you have, I think, basically Jake Sullivan making that threat public. And last week we learned from the Washington Post that the U.S. had been sending some back-channel communications to Russia, and those were non-specific threats on what the U.S. would do in response to Russian escalations. And on Sunday, Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, made some pretty provocative comments. So what do we have here, Dave?
Well, yeah, he said that the U.S. told Russia, they would face catastrophic consequences if they used a nuclear weapon in Ukraine. And he said that they made it specific to Russia. They told them exactly what the U.S. would do. But according to those reports, like you said, it was vague. But maybe there's been some communication, back channel communication since Putin came out. And, that was also when he announced the partial mobilization, when he said that warning about Russia's territorial integrity. So maybe there's been more stuff there. But if you look at Sullivan's wording, I mean, he's saying catastrophic. I read David Sanger in the New York Times. He had an article about it, and he was kind of saying, it's non, the U.S. wouldn't respond, wouldn't have a nuclear response if Russia, say, detonates a nuclear weapon over the Black Sea, or if they use a tactical nuke in Ukraine. But from Sullivan's comments, I mean, that's what you're putting out publicly, catastrophic consequences. I mean, that sure sounds like it's at least hinting at a nuclear strike on Russia or a response to that level. So that's kind of just what we're dealing with now. And that's basically trading nuclear threats. And, if the U.S., let's just say this escalation begins and Russia uses a tactical nuke, there's still no sign that they're preparing to. That's also important here. They're making these warnings, but still, it's not something I don't think we should expect to see, at least anytime soon. Hopefully. But if we enter that nuclear escalatory spiral, Russia uses a tactical nuke, say the U.S. uses a nuke on a Russian military base, a smaller one or something, then, I mean, it begins that escalatory ladder where we could end up with strategic nukes being used and billions of people dying. So, I mean, that's just the way things can go, and that's what we're dealing with, and that's why it's so just crazy, frankly, that the Biden administration is still pursuing this policy of funding this war right on Russia's border.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll do just a real quick plug here, Dave, because I know me and you both have events coming up. 2 weeks from now, you're speaking in D.C. for the Assange event on the 8th, along with Joe Loria and Garland Nitson. I'm speaking at the event in Denver on that same day. So if you're in Denver, come out and see me. If you're in the D.C. area, go out and see Dave DeCamp. So hopefully, Dave, they hold off on the nuclear war at least for a couple weeks here so we could give our free Assange speeches. But want to just ask you bigger picture here, right? Because it seems like we are in a real escalation spiral with Russia, where Russia's new escalation is basically to claim all the Ukrainian territory it captured as Russia. And then to say, look, if you're carrying out attacks on this territory, it's going to be Russian attacks. We've seen from the past where Russia has done this with Crimea, and yet the U.S. has told Kiev that, hey, yeah, you could go ahead and attack Crimea because you still claim it as yours, and it definitely seems like we've seen those attacks carried out. And so do you think the West is going to, tell the Kiev to hey, watch out for this a little bit? This seems to be the Kremlin's response to the counteroffensives, right? You're not going to take any more territory because any territory you try to take from now on is going to be Russia, and we're making it very clear that won't happen. So is that kind of the sense you're getting? And do you see any sign at all that anyone in the West is at all interested in saying this is maybe too far, this is where we're going to call it quits?
When it comes to anybody in the West, I haven't seen anybody publicly, at least any U.S. officials, British officials, or anything like that saying, "Hold on a minute, maybe we got to slow down and think about this a little more before we push Ukraine to launch more counteroffensives." But what I think Russia did, you're right, it's completely a response to Ukraine's counteroffensive in the northeast Kharkiv region there, because that more than anything else, I think, was a big PR victory for Ukraine. And it sent a message to Russians, ethnic Russians or Ukrainians that were living in Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine that have kind of decided, okay, the Russians are here to stay, I guess I'll try to go back to life as normal as possible and just accept that Russians are here. And with that in mind, they have to worry about if Ukraine comes back in and they're cracking down on collaborators and stuff. So I think that Kharkiv offensive might have spooked some of those people in those areas, and I think that's a big part of the reason why Russia is saying, okay, referendums are going to join Russia, we're not going anywhere. That's what the message they're sending to the people that live there. And after taking that step, they're not going to go anywhere. They're going to do everything they can to protect these territories. So I mean, it's just a matter of what they might do. You mentioned Crimea. There were some attacks in Crimea, and Russia did make clear also that they would view, U.S. Western encouraged attacks in Crimea as a pretty serious escalation. So it's just a matter of time. I mean, I've seen a lot of people say that when they're trying to justify sending Ukraine more military aid, more longer range weapons, they say, well, the Russians haven't done anything yet. They haven't attacked NATO territory yet, but at some point, they might take that step, and just the fact that they haven't yet is not a good argument to continue this. But the U.S. in Congress, the Biden administration, they're all deliberating on the next set of advanced weapons to send Ukraine. So far, the Biden administration has been hesitant to send these longer range missiles that Ukraine wants, but there's a lot of pressure on them to send it, so I just don't see it slowing down. And I think I don't want to speculate too much on what Russia might do, but if we see some serious major HIMARS being used a lot in these territories that after they are absorbed by Russia, a potential Russian response could be something like hitting a NATO base, a military arms depot in Poland or something. And then what could happen after that?
So, if anybody is just tuning in to conflicts of interest, but they usually watch or read any kind of mainstream outlet, they've seen the referendums, but there's always a word in front of it, Dave, is sham. These are sham referendums, and I just want your take on that, because it does seem kind of unfair to hold a vote in the middle of a war. My guess is that anybody who is very supportive of the blue and yellow has probably fled that territory at this point, so yeah, but at the same time, if you look at the populations here, it's pretty likely that they would have voted to join Russia, particularly the Donetsk and Luhansk, the Donbass region. Previously in 2014, they did, try to hold a referendum to join Russia, and Putin said no. So I would assume that this is the way the vote will go, but I'm just, wondering your take on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, like you said, particularly for those regions in the Donbass, they've been asking for years to join Russia. When it comes to Kherson and Zaporizhia, I'm not too sure. I know that there are a lot of ethnic Russians, and I'm sure that there were a lot of people that live there that would like to join Russia, but then at the same time, I'm sure there's people that have fled and are not happy that their home is going to become part of Russia. And the referendums, I mean, who knows? It seems like the results are going to be that they are going to vote to join Russia. How accurate, how transparent the vote is, I really there's no way for me to tell. But I do think, like you said, a lot of the people that are there have stayed and kind of accepted that this is going to be Russian-controlled territory. This might become part of Russia, because all the officials that Russia installed have been saying that for a while now, for months, that we're going to hold referendums. We want to become part of Russia. So the people that are living there are probably expecting that. And maybe after the Kharkiv offensive, they might want some more assurances that Ukraine's not going to come back in. So a lot of them might be happy to be joining Russia. But again, who really knows? And like you said, it's not really a fair time to hold these referendums when it's really under military occupation, these territories. But, I think we should expect them to join Russia, and it's probably going to happen this week.
Okay, yeah, so I do want to go there and ask you about that article. I think you've already touched on it, and there's probably not that much more to say. But in 2014, again, some of these territories did try to join Russia, and Russia said no. And, it's pretty clear that no matter what, there's not going to be as solid of an argument as there is for Crimea, for becoming a part of Russia, for these additional 4 territories. And so is there any chance, Dave, that any of these regions don't end up joining Russia, or does it seem like an absolute foregone conclusion that all 4 definitely will be joining Russia, not just because the people there want to, but because the people in Moscow will accept them?
Yeah, I think at this point it's a foregone conclusion. And again, a big reason why I say that is because what happened in Kharkiv and how Russia left that region, it looked like they didn't really try to defend it too hard. Just the kind of propaganda of that retreat, they needed to say, all right, look, we're not leaving these areas. This is going to be Russia now. And, I don't see them backing down at this point, unless there's some secret negotiations that we don't know about, and this was a way to get leverage in them, but it doesn't seem like there's any kind of peace talks going on.
Yeah, so let's talk about that for a second, because I don't think this story was out the last time I spoke with you, but it's even now been confirmed by U.S. officials that, yes, there were negotiations in April, March, that almost led to an agreement. And that agreement, Dave, was shockingly easy on Kiev, I thought. I really thought Russia would have wanted a lot more Ukrainian territory, but they seem to be willing to accept pretty little, withdraw back to the 2014 lines just to make those official, essentially, and have Ukraine agree not to join NATO. And so, given that, I guess, what do you think Russia is doing here? Like, are their goals really just, as limited now as, like, making the Sea of Azov a lake, securing the water rights above, the waterways above the Crimean Peninsula, securing the Donbass region, and that's it? Or do you think, we're going to see a battle for Odessa here?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think right now this is what Russia is focusing on, and there's no sign that Ukraine's going to back down, and there's no sign that the U.S. and NATO will. So I think as the fighting continues, Russia's goals are going to keep expanding, because kind of the purpose of the war was to eliminate a threat from Ukraine that Putin saw from NATO. And if that threat continues, they're just going to keep pushing further in. I think Lavrov has kind of made that pretty clear. There were some loose war goals, vague war goals announced by Putin when the war first started, the denazification and the demilitarization that could be applied. It could go farther than some cases, depending on what would have happened there. But like you said, that peace deal that was originally on the table, it seemed like neutrality was kind of the big thing, return back to 2014 borders. But we're just way past, we've gone way past that point. And Putin said in his speech last week, when he was announced the mobilization, he said that there was a deal on the table that addressed Russia's concerns that Ukraine was happy enough with, but he said it was wrecked by the West. He said that they were basically ordered Ukraine not to accept it. And there was that report in Ukrainian media that said Boris Johnson basically told that to Zelensky. And Boris Johnson didn't quite say that himself, but he did say when he went to Kiev in April, he told them don't negotiate with Russia. He urged them not to negotiate with Russia. So I think it's pretty clear that the U.S. and NATO wanted the war to continue at that point. And then it was after that peace deal fell apart that we saw Lloyd Austin say that the U.S. wants to weaken Russia, and that $40 billion Ukraine aid bill was pushed through. So it was, if you just looking back at the timeline, I think it's pretty clear that they wanted this war to continue so they could try to hurt Russia. And now, unless there's something I'm really missing, it just doesn't seem like there's a chance for any kind of peace talks. And if And it could, I think, potentially the future we could see a battle over Odessa, but at this point, Russia's just focusing on those areas that it controls.
Yeah. Yeah, not a whole lot of good news there, Dave. I guess just building off of that, it seems like on the global stage we have Turkey and Erdogan, who previously I had deemed as one of the most likely world leaders to cause the end of the world, but now it seems like one of the few who's actually trying to prevent the Armageddon. We have the Mexican president, the head of the UN, and Mohammed bin Salman, kind of an odd collection of characters that seem to want to have at least a little bit of interest in diplomacy here. I saw... I forget, it was like a 30-second clip on TV, but some exasperated talking head was on there, Dave, saying the Mexican president wants to negotiate between Russia and Ukraine, but he hasn't even condemned Vladimir Putin yet. And so, just given the toll... Oh, I guess, we should throw the Catholic Church and the Pope in there. They have made some efforts, I think, to really actually act in a mildly neutral way and to get some aid to some people. That's actually been somewhat helpful. But, I mean, is it really that limited of a group that's interested in diplomacy here? Is everybody else either content on profiting off of the war and fighting it, or what is that really the negotiations we have for peace, I guess?
Well, when it comes to the U.S., NATO, the EU, I think it is pretty limited, the people that want diplomacy. But when it comes to the rest of the world, it seems like most of the rest of the world wants peace talks, including China and India. Everybody's accusing them of supporting the war, and they're definitely helping Russia out by purchasing all this oil and expanding trade ties with them. But they're not giving material support for the war, and they're calling for peace talks. They say they want that war to end. And then if you look at other major countries like Brazil, they've also been calling for talks, for negotiations. And many across the African continent, they're not falling in line with this policy. They're not following the U.S. But when it comes to the West, I mean, I think the best bet that we have, our biggest hope, is in Europe, is in the EU, is in the people kind of rising up against their governments, which we're seeing a lot of. The big news today is the Italian elections. That right-wing party won the majority, but they're pro-NATO, so that's not too good for us. Because I know in some other countries, all the more right-wing elements are pretty anti-NATO and are against funding this war. But as their energy prices in Europe are getting just ridiculous, and the winter's coming, and I just think people are going to be fed up with these policies that have just backfired on Europe. And I think kind of changing those governments and getting more of them against this, supporting this war, is kind of our best bet. But also at the same time, I mean, you had Macron and Scholz, French President Macron and the German Chancellor. They were kind of, hesitant. They've been falling in line with the sanctions and sending weapons, but they've been more hesitant than other countries. But you saw they were kind of, put in their place, it seems like, because they have kind of changed their tone. I mean, Macron's still speaking with Putin once in a while, but it doesn't really seem like they're pushing hard for a change in policy or anything. They're just saying, well, we should still talk with them, which is, the mildest pushback I think they could be giving. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's going to be up to the people in these countries.
It does seem like there's a real demand that this war end with Russia's unconditional surrender, that there's not going to be real diplomacy. And I mean, in fact, a lot of times that's pretty much directly what Western leaders are saying, that, once Ukraine has backed Russia into a corner, then they'll negotiate when it's appropriate for Ukraine, which, usually isn't how these things are going to end. Anything else on Russia that you want to mention? I want to switch our directions towards China here.
No, nothing major I could think of. I guess the next escalation from the U.S. side is going to be whether or not they're going to send these longer-range missiles. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. But, there's not really any... just not looking good, that situation. It's looking very bleak.
Yeah. So, Dave, our president, is this guy who constantly, I don't know if you saw the recent video, he's like walking around with a blind man, and like then somebody else has to help escort the blind man because Joe Biden is incapable, or looks like the blind man's actually helping him around. And so, we have this picture of this extremely feeble man who could barely string together sentences. And when Republicans say Joe Biden has sold out our country to China, people kind of believe that China might be telling Joe Biden what to do, because it kind of seems like Joe Biden doesn't know what to do. But yet, he's been extremely aggressive on the China issue. While he pushed the Ukraine issue a lot further than anybody could have imagined, I think the steps he has taken to abandon the one China policy, adopt a policy of strategic clarity towards Taiwan, was pretty much unthinkable even a couple of years ago. Even if Trump had remained president, I would have thought that this is several steps ahead of where we would be, especially given that we have to fight a war with Russia right now. So, what the hell is going on, Dave? Why does the president keep saying we're going to put American troops in Taiwan to defend the island from China?
Yeah, that's a good question. It seems like, and this is the fourth time he said it. And if you watch that 60 Minutes interview, he was asked, would the U.S. defend Taiwan? He said yes, in the event of an unprecedented attack, which would be pretty much any attack by China. And then the host asked again, so you're saying, unlike Ukraine, American men and women would go to fight for Taiwan? And he said yes. And the White House didn't really walk it back. They just said it's not a change in policy. And later, Kirk Campbell, the top Asia official on the National Security Council, said, he said he wouldn't characterize what the White House said as a walk back. And he said Biden's comments speak for themselves. So that marks a shift in just kind of what the White House, what the administration was putting out after Biden made that comment before, which seemed more like gaffes. But this time, it didn't seem like one. And I think this is just part of the overall policy toward China that we're seeing, that China is, even though as we're shipping billions of dollars worth of weapons into Ukraine and funding this proxy war against Russia, when it comes to the U.S., what the U.S. military is thinking, the establishment is thinking is China. We have to justify this build-up around China, and Nancy Pelosi's trip there sparked unprecedented military drills, and now you have Biden coming out and saying this, and it's going to make China's going to react in some way, and then that's just going to be used as justification to build up more there. And the Senate's working on this bill to give Taiwan $6.5 billion in military aid. So I think it's kind of just part of this overall policy, and they keep saying that the U.S. policy on China is not changing, but it very, very clearly is. And anybody that says otherwise is just wrong, or just intentionally lying. So again, this just is one of those things that just seems so short-sighted to me. Like, if they actually cared about Taiwan, this definitely would not be the way to approach it. It seems like they're making war much more likely. And, a Chinese invasion of Taiwan would be just this massive operation. China has no interest in doing that right now. But there are other options they could take. They've showed in these recent military drills that they could blockade the island pretty quickly. Taiwan controls some islands on the southeast coast of the mainland. On the other side of the Taiwan Strait, on the mainland side, maybe they could grab those islands. They could probably do that pretty quickly. And then what's the U.S. response going to be? How close are we to actually entering some sort of conflict with China? It seemed to me unthinkable. And I always would say, even as I was warning about U.S.-China tensions for the past few years, a conflict won't happen for another decade at least. But now, and I'm not trying to be alarmist, but it does seem like if they keep going in this direction, these big steps and changing these policies so radically, something could happen a lot quicker. And I think these sanctions on Russia have shown that the U.S. and its allies in those governments, the Western governments, aren't really they don't seem to be concerned about the backlash on their own economies, at least, or they're that stupid that they didn't see what would happen. Because, of course, with China, there's such a massive trading partner of the U.S. that if they try to put them under sanctions like they did Russia, it would really hurt us. So, yeah, who knows what could happen now just in the next few years.
Yeah. So, Dave, let's zoom out and go kind of big picture here. because I want to go back to this feeble Joe Biden who seems to struggle to read planned statements at times, right? Who is directing foreign policy then? Do you have a sense of who it is in the White House who is in charge of this thing? I guess my kind of view on this is a snake with many heads. So you got Antony Blinken being aggressive where Antony Blinken wants to be aggressive. Sullivan, Newland, Sam Power, all these people are in the administration, Susan Rice, and they all have different roles. And I think basically they're all just like doing aggressive things. So, Robert Malley and Richard Nephew are on the Iran file. So they're aggressive towards Iran. And so is the new head of CENTCOM, right? And so they all are kind of the reason we're aggressive on Iran, along with the Israel policy. When it comes to Russia, I think it's more Newland and Blinken. When we looked at China, we got Ratner, Campbell, Blinken, Sullivan, pretty much all of them over there. And so I guess I wonder if like the White House is compartmentalized and they're all just running ahead with their individual wars and not realizing that how are you going to win an economic war against Russia, fight China over Taiwan, sanction Iran, sanction Venezuela, remove Assad in Syria. It just seems unthinkably stupid that you would, like, even if you really, like, were an evil person, Dave, and you were sitting there in the White House advising Joe Biden how the U.S. could hold on to as much of its empire as possible, you would think the first thing you would say to do would be, well, get back in the Iran deal. And so that's going to help energy prices, and then that will give you a little bit more leverage with Russia and China. And they're just, it's not happening. And so it's baffling to me how we are in this position. I just want your take on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a good point, because even if, say, you favored, U.S. hegemony and you want the U.S. to still be the global empire, the dominant superpower, there would be much better ways to do what they're trying to do here. And so I think you're right that it is split up into separate factions, because I remember in the beginning of the Biden administration, I read a few reports that said there were some elements that thought they should kind of ease tensions with Russia, maybe mend ties with Russia a little bit, and focus on China. And if you zoom out and look at the big picture, and if you are the American empire, if you're a neocon or whatever who wants to control the world, Russia's wasn't really a threat, and they could have, it could have been easy kind of to mend ties, to let them have their influence over Ukraine, and then work them against China, instead of the policy that they went with is just bringing Russia and China closer together and creating this new economic system that other countries such as Iran and other countries under sanctions could look to. So I would say, but I guess the Russia file was ultimately pursued by Newland and Blinken and people like that were so hawkish on Russia and so pivotally involved in U.S. policy on Ukraine during the Obama administration. And then when it comes to China, Kurt Campbell, who you mentioned, he co-founded the Center for New American Security, which is basically like the neocon think tank today that is putting out policy papers and stuff, and it's really all about China. And then Eli Ratner, he's a special advisor. I mean, total China hawks who think we should be confronting China as much as we can. Campbell said last year, I think, that the era of engagement with China is over, and now it will be defined by competition and confrontation. So even just the idea of engaging with China, he doesn't want that. So does that mean that he wants, more decoupling and stuff? So it just seems like all the hawks are going in their own direction and they're just using force and trying to control everything. That's their answer to everything is force, and they're going to overextend themselves. I mean, it's already an overextended empire, but if you start, really poking China enough that they might do something over Taiwan, I mean, really, if that happens right now, like I think it's silly to say, because when Putin first invaded Ukraine, so many of the hawks said, "Oh, China's going to invade Taiwan now. This is their they're going to take this opportunity to invade Taiwan. And again, China has no interest to launch a full-scale invasion of Taiwan. But something could happen, and it would be a pretty serious message to the U.S. if China did something like that right now. I mean, they're just so overextended that if we tried to sanction China, it would really just ruin us. So they've just put themselves in this position that it doesn't seem like there's any getting out of unless somebody really changes things.
Yeah, it's baffling to watch, and at times, Dave, you really wonder, like, is there something bigger going on that I'm missing here? Because it just seems so foolish to pursue all the aims that they're pursuing, but that's government work for you, I suppose, and that's how you end up with a policy like this, where they're just kicking around the idea of killing billions of people in nuclear war, and I mean, the Iran stuff's all ridiculous too.
I think kind of like the simple explanation for it, which could be true, is just that there's just all this money to be made from the defense contractors, from the weapons makers. I mean, you think about it, it's just they're making a killing off of this Ukraine policy, and now they're looking to arm Taiwan with billions of dollars. So it might just be as simple as that the people that are running our government are lobbied and former Raytheon board members and stuff, and there's just so much money to be made in what they're doing right now, and it is just a government program of creating this work for the weapons makers and at the expense of the taxpayers and the rest of the world. So it could just be that, but sometimes I think maybe that's too simple and that there is some kind of bigger thing going on here.
All right, Dave, thank you so much for coming back on the show. We will do something again soon here, and just want to remind people to check out antiwar.com every day and support when you can. Dave, you're at DeCamp Dave on Twitter, and you're putting out the daily show. What's the YouTube channel name? Anti-War News?
Yeah, it's Anti-War News with Dave DeCamp is the channel name, and then you could also download it wherever you listen to podcasts. And it's also on Odysee, the video.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Kyle.